Welcome to the And She Looked Up Creative Hour podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Hartfield, and I'm an artist and an entrepreneur. And yes, those two things can go together. This podcast is for the artists, the creatives, and the makers who want to find a way to make a living doing what they love. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the And She Looked Up podcast. As always, I'm your host, Melissa, and this week, Heather Travis is back for her April visit. Welcome to the show, Heather.
Hello, Melissa.
I am happy to have you here because today we're talking about pricing.
Money.
More specifically, we are talking about how to raise your prices or raise your rates. So we've done a few episodes in the past on pricing your work, and I will link to those in the show notes if you want to go have a listen. There is a ton of good stuff in those episodes. But today we're going to specifically be talking about how do you get more money? How do you raise your rates? And I'm willing to bet that every one of us listening to this, myself included, probably Heather too, I'm willing to bet we're all undercharging. So there is probably money being left on the table. And this for me, I can't speak for Heather, but for me, this is definitely going to be a mindset episode because I am in the process of raising my service rates right now and also evaluating my product rates. And I am, I'm struggling and it's like 99.9% mindset for me. So
yeah.
How about you?
I think it is a little bit of mindset. I agree with you. And funny enough, because we were just discussing, you and I both raised our rates this year, our service rates. And I've also done some things which we'll discuss on the product side as well. And some changes on that end. But every time, like I just sent out another quote yesterday for a project with my increased rates. And as I sent it, I was like, ugh.
Did you want to throw up?
I kind of did.
Yeah, exactly.
At the same time, I think in terms of my rationale, and we'll get into it more in terms of like why to raise your rates, how to raise your rates and all of those things. But one of the things was if they come back to me and accept it, I have a really big workload right now. And so in order to make this really worth my while, I have to have that bigger rate on it, because if they came back in terms of wanting to throw up, if somebody came back to me and said, yes, we'll take it at that lower rate, and I had to add another project to my workload for a low rate, that to me is like a worse feeling of wanting to throw up than the fear around will they even accept the higher rate.
Yeah, because at that point, you know that you're running the risk of disappointing people, and you don't want to disappoint people and not make, and you're not, like, it wasn't even worth it financially.
That's exactly it.
So, nobody wants to disappoint customers, period. But to know that you disappointed them and you didn't even make a sustainable amount of income is just a sinking feeling in your stomach. So
no kidding. Yeah,
we're going to be talking about all of that today. This is going to be one of those episodes where it's like, do as I say, not as I do.
Not because, as I do. Oh, right. Yes.
Because this is something that we're struggling with as well. And we know all the right things to say. You know, we've coached people on this. But I think you never really get rid of that feeling that, you know, how dare you charge that much money for something? I will start off, though, with something that was said to me a long, long time ago that has always stuck in my head. And that is that when somebody asks you how much it's going to cost to do something or how much something is, and you tell them, like, let's say somebody comes to you and says, how much is an hour of your time for coaching? And you say, it's $300. If there's a pause, you've probably priced yourself right. If there's a, yeah, okay, immediate response, immediate acceptance of the price, you're probably pricing too low. So, because if you're priced correctly, there should be a moment where your client, particularly in services, is like, okay, this is an investment I need to make. Am I committed to it? Yes, I am. So they should have that pause. Like, is it worth it? But if they're just responding like before you even get the full number out.
Yeah. Like, so done, I'll take it.
They're like, wow, this is a bargain, I'm in. Like, and you probably have left some money on the table. Yeah. So I don't know if that's always the case, but I've definitely found through the years of doing this that there have been times where people didn't even blink. And it's like, oh, I probably could have gone higher.
Totally. And in terms of negotiation, I think you and I have talked about it before. In terms of negotiation, you can start at a higher rate and negotiate and go a little lower. When somebody says sold, I'll take it, you can't say, oh, no, I changed my mind.
It's an extra $100.
You can't do that. But if somebody says, ooh, you have the opportunity, you're in control of the situation to actually say, okay, well, you waver. I'm sorry, that's my rate and I'm sticking to it. Or you have the opportunity to say, okay, well, maybe we change the project. Maybe we change this and get a rate that's more acceptable. So that's, right. I think that's a little bit more on negotiation tactic, but I think that goes into the money conversation, is that you have to start high in order to go down. But if you start low,
it's very hard to pull yourself back out. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And this is the thing that I've been struggling with in terms of raising my rates for services this year, is that I know I'm priced too low. And as I raise them, new clients who come on pay the higher rates. But where I really struggle is going back to old clients and saying, I'm really sorry, but, and should I even be apologizing in that sentence?
I know.
Don't know. But, I've had to raise my rates and this is what it is. And I've kind of been trying to dive into the mindset of that. Like, why is that? And I think in some cases it's because a lot of them are also friends, and I don't want to feel like I'm, I have a hard time charging friends, period.
I know. Me too.
It's just very difficult for me, but at the same time I need to eat, so I can't work for free. So it's a very tricky space to be in. And so we're going to talk about some of the tactics that you can use to raise your rates, and how to know when maybe you're not charging enough. And I think part of this also comes from the fact that it's very hard sometimes to find out what the going rate is.
Totally. Yes.
Because
especially if you're like a freelancer.
Yes.
There's no agency comparative or no. And especially as creatives, like what you do is there is no apples to apples comparison to be like, oh, I can go to Heather and get it for this price, or I can go to Melissa and get it for this price. When you come to Heather, you're getting a whole different thing than when you're going to Melissa.
Exactly.
So, it doesn't matter $100 here, $100 there. It's like you're going into a bakery and going into a butcher shop. Like, you're getting totally different things.
It is. And I think also, it's also a little bit on us in that as creatives, we don't like to talk about money. Money conversations are pushed to the side. And I really think a friend said to me not that long ago, like, we need to normalize money conversations.
Yes.
Like, why are we being secretive about it? It doesn't help anybody. And I think we've always known that women and people of color and, we don't get paid the equivalent to other people. And there's a reason why we've been sort of conditioned to keep silent about what we get paid.
Yeah.
Because it serves somebody else. It doesn't serve us.
Yeah, and we've always been told, don't talk about it. That's not polite to talk about.
It's not polite to talk about. It's not. And when you start to see the discrepancies, I think that's the word I was looking for, in how people are paid to do the same things, like, now we're realizing, okay, well, maybe this is the reason we've been told to keep it quiet. So these discrepancies aren't seen.
Yeah.
And so I really do think, like, what is the big deal? It is money. Money is just a tool, right? That's how we should view it. It's a tool to help us do the things we want to do. And we should not, we should be much more open about these conversations. I've used this comparison many times before. When you go out to buy a car, like, you're going to pay a lot more for a Mercedes than you are for like a little Honda Fit.
Yep.
Right?
Yes.
Right. And there's a reason for that. Nobody in their right mind would question the difference.
Yeah.
Like, they're completely different cars for different purposes and different types of people. it's the same with our fees and our services. When you
Yes.
pay for a fee or when you pay for a service, you're paying for them to accomplish something. Like they're going to make you something, they're going to draw you something, they're going to design you something. But you're also paying for that person's style
Yep.
and experience
Yes.
and the experience that you have with them. And like you already said, the experience somebody has with me is going to be different than you. The style that somebody gets with me is going to be different than what they get with you. You can't compare that. It's different.
No.
And so there's a lot of stuff going on in the background that we just have to start getting more comfortable with and be more upfront about.
Absolutely. And I think too, just to go back to the car example, there's the physical differences, and Brian and I talk about it a lot at the bike shop, because like, what's the difference between, one brake brand, a Trek versus a Specialized? It's whatever paint color you like best, like quite literally, because the branding is where the differences come in. It's not in the mechanics, right? All cars have 4 wheels and a steering wheel and a brake and, seats. And yes, there's bells and whistles that make something cost more than something with less bells and whistles. But once you move beyond that, beyond the apples to apples comparison, that's where branding comes in. And as an artist or a creative, that branding, I want to work with Heather because she XYZ, and that's the like value proposition, the branding, and that should be part of your services and product pricing plan. Go ahead. Like that brand value, right? Like when I'm investing in working with Fine Line Designs on greeting cards, I'm not just getting greeting cards. There's the product, right? But I'm purchasing from Fine Line Designs, which is a small independent person. It's Melissa. Like there's the brand that goes with that. And to me, that's part of the value and part of the exchange of dollar. So I think in terms of the dollar conversation that people need to have, there's the hard dollar conversation. And then there's just the like 20%, which is the intrinsic value that you bring as the artist or creative, and it's your unique value proposition. And I think that's where it makes us throw up is that it's because we associate the whole fee with me as opposed to 80% of just like skills on execution and 20% is actually the value placed on me, Heather, right? It's not 100%. And so when somebody comes back and says no to that dollar value, they're not saying shame on you, Heather, bad artist, no, right? Even though that's the way it feels. Right?
Yes.
It's the price. And that's, I think we need to separate, I think, a little bit of the ego from the pricing structure, is realize that sometimes, you're listing out the widgets and then you need to add the brand on top of that. Yeah.
Yes. I was just taking a sip of my tea there. Yes. That's a really good place to start is the branding. I think that's one of the things when you're thinking about raising your rates. One of the things to look at is how do you put yourself out there into the world? Do you come across as a budget brand? Because if you do, then that's what people are going to expect to pay, right? You go to Walmart for a reason. You go there, or to Costco for a reason. You go there for cheap stuff, right? Or the dollar store. You go to Louis Vuitton for a completely different experience because it's marketed to you as a luxury brand, right?
Yes.
It's very different. You would never expect to go into Louis Vuitton and spend $30 for a purse.
No.
Right?
No.
And yet, if you were to go into Walmart and you saw a purse for $50, you'd be like, holy crap, that's expensive.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're shopping in 2 very different environments.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's something to think about as you're thinking about raising your rate.
No, but that is the thing about in terms of your rates is that that Walmart purse and that Louis Vuitton purse both have handles, both have bottoms on them, both have zippers.
You can put your
right?
stuff in them. Exactly.
You can put your stuff in them, right? And so they fulfill the same function, but is one real leather, one is fake leather. So yes, the input costs are different, but there's also the branding that goes along with that. The reason people carry around a Louis Vuitton is like, yes, it's high quality leather. Yes, it's exceptional workmanship, but it's because it's a friggin' Louis Vuitton. You carry it because it's the symbol of the brand, not. And so there's just like art, there's people who have art in their homes, not because they love it, but because it's Van Gogh. and it's the
Or,
monetary value, right?
yes.
And so that branding is a huge part, particularly in anything creative, which is exactly who we're talking to. It's
Yeah.
that I think branding plays a big part in how people view your creative business, and should not be forgotten when we develop service pricing and also product pricing.
Yeah, and that's something to think about when you're putting this all together, is that if you want to raise your rates, you're going to have to make sure that your branding
Mm.
reflects the experience people are. So if you hire somebody to do something for you, for, let's say, make a logo. You hire somebody to make you a logo for $300, which is the low end of logo design, very low end of logo
Mm-hmm.
design. You spend $300 for somebody to make you a logo, or you spend $3,000 for somebody to make you a logo. You are going to expect your client, if you're the $300 person, is going to expect a very different experience than the person
Mm-hmm.
who's spending $3,000. And so if you want to get to that point where you're the $3,000 logo designer, or even 1,500 or even 1,000,
Mm-hmm.
you have to think about what you're offering in terms of the full experience working with you. That $3,000 logo design, you're going to have to provide a kid glove service where your client is treated very differently. It doesn't
Yes.
mean that you're going to make a better logo necessarily than the $300 one, but it's all the extras that go into it. What is their
Totally.
onboarding process? How, from the moment they have that first contact with you, what kind of tone does that set?
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the things you have to think about before you raise your rates. Because if you're charging that budget $300 logo, and your service is kind of a budget service, if you want to raise your rates, you're going to have to think about how you're going to change the service, or the
Yeah.
perception of the service. Maybe that's
Yeah.
even a better way to say it.
Yes.
Pricing is very psychological.
Absolutely, it is.
So yes, in terms of raising your service rates, first of all, you need to look at the messaging that you're sending out
Mm-hmm.
with your services, and make sure that what you're offering matches the pricing that you're trying to get to. So, and that might take some rejigging. And this is the thing with pricing, is it's not something you figure out once and then you're done with it.
No.
I've been self-employed for over a decade, and I am constantly fiddling
Yes.
around with pricing,
Yeah.
and I'm sure you are too. It's just markets change, technology changes, lots of things change that affect
Totally.
how we produce what we produce, or put out what we put out, and that all
Totally.
affects how you
And
price.
plus, too, I even have, like, sometimes my spidey senses just kick me into high gear in terms of, like, quoting on a project. And so even though my pricing is sort of the same, I add in buffers to quotes sometimes, because I'm like, you have called me 3 times to talk about this quote, and we haven't even gotten to the project, which means you're going to be calling me a lot when it comes to the project, which means client management budget for you, it's going up. And I automatically pad that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's the other thing to remember, is that even if you're like, okay, categorically, I changed my pricing and my pricing list has gone up, and it's in your head, you've never published it, but know that it can change project to project based
Yes.
on, you get off a call, and I've had calls with clients and I'm like, you are going to be one high maintenance client. And that's not something I tell them, but I put it in my budget and work it into the budget so that I am fairly compensated for my time for all of those 15-minute, I don't mean to bother you while you're cooking dinner calls, which of course I answer because that's the level of service I deliver. But I'll tell you, I don't resent them when I know I am getting paid.
This is why it's so important to price yourself properly. And if you're not charging enough, if you're getting paid and you find yourself getting angry with your clients because of the amount of your time they're taking up, you're not charging enough.
Exactly.
That is a clear sign, clear red flag to you that you are not charging enough. You always want to make sure that you're charging enough so that when somebody interrupts your thoughts process, or while you're making dinner, or whatever your boundaries are with your clients, you're fine with it because you're getting paid a lot of money.
Exactly.
Right? One example is with an old blog that I had. It was an old recipe blog, sponsored content. If I was asked to develop a recipe, my rate for that was ridiculously high because I hate developing recipes.
Hated doing it.
I hated doing it, and I hated doing it for on demand. Like I love messing around in the kitchen and creating stuff, but I hate it when there's a deadline for it. And so I was charging a ridiculous amount based on my blog's traffic and my social reach. Like, and I didn't care because I didn't care if people said no. Right? That's the one time where I was really able to price myself probably where it should have been, because I didn't care if people said no. But if they did say yes, they were going to pay me enough money that fine, I'll do it. I didn't say that very clearly, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Money talks, girlfriend. Money talks.
It is. So you want to make sure that you're being, so that when you do get asked for that little extra thing or for 5 more minutes of your time, you're fine with it. And like you said, it can change from project to project. That is 100% okay.
Yeah. And that's where, like, one of the things, and just to give a very clear example in terms of like a product pricing strategy, if somebody comes back to me, particularly with murals, because with murals there's a lot of back and forth on design concept, my price to deliver that mural kind of stands where you have wiggle room, and where that pricing structure can be is flexible is in number of revisions, edits, go rounds.
So this is a really interesting way to raise your rates. You don't actually raise your rates, but you remove services from that rate. That's a raise. You're doing less work for the same amount of money. So that's a very subtle way that you can raise your rates. It works really well for services, not so well for like physical products. But if you're a photographer and you charge $1,000 for a session, and they get so many prints, or not prints, but so many
like digitals,
not even digitals. Oh my God, my brain today. You get 75 photos to choose from. But if you want to give yourself a raise, you might still charge $1,000, but all of a sudden they only get 50 shots during the session, or 1 outfit change during the session instead of 2 outfit changes. So those are ways that you can give yourself a raise without actually raising your rates.
Yes, I've done that with a bunch of different projects this year, and it's not about, part of it was about raising my rates, but it was also around boundaries on services. So there's certain things that I do as part of projects that my skill level and expertise, you shouldn't be paying me for that, because you technically wouldn't want to be able to afford me. You can give that money to somebody else to do that aspect of the project, or you can give it to me and it's going to cost you that much more. And so yes, I guess it's sort of, I don't want to say I'm leaving money on the table, because I'm not. I'm eliminating a portion of a project that now gives me time to do other things to get paid fairly for something that I was. And I'm not saying I wasn't being paid fairly, but for my skills and expertise, I could be getting paid more fairly elsewhere. And so that was a decision that I made to say, okay, I'm going to strip out this element of certain projects and move it over here, and I have it as a separate. So you want A, and to add B on, it's going to be this fee. And that means now when I do that little extra add-on, I'm really getting paid for it, because it's the thing that I either don't want to do, I don't have time or capacity to do, but because you're paying me to do it, I will make the time and capacity, versus resenting making the time and capacity for, $5.
Yes. And that's something, I hadn't really thought about talking about subcontracting on this episode, but that's actually a point where you could take a look at it, is if your time and your skills are better used elsewhere at a higher rate, you can subcontract out some of the work. So I think this is quite common in, say, the legal field. You will, if you are working, if you have a legal firm, let's just say have a big legal firm that represents you right there. If you are being represented by one of the partners, their hourly rate is going to be much higher than a brand new lawyer who's just joined the firm fresh after qualifying through the bar, right?
Yeah, yes.
So And the reason for that is expertise, right? The partner has been doing this much longer. They have built up much more expertise. You're going to be paying them a lot more money. So if you're on a budget, the firm might assign you to a junior lawyer with a lower hourly rate. Okay. Yep. So that's something that you can do. If there's something, if there's a piece of the project that you just shouldn't be doing.
Yep. Just like a lot of people have VAs, virtual assistants,
absolutely,
for their blog work, and that, like, helping people post their pins to Tailwind and doing other things like that. If you can subcontract that and get that off, but then remember that their fees are still part of your fees. That's a cost of you doing business, right? And so you need to factor it in. You can't just say, oh, I've just pushed this. Yay, I don't have to do that anymore. Well, yay, you don't have to do that anymore, but you need to, supervise and make sure they're representing your brand properly so that you can continue to demand the fees that you want to demand. But you also need to recognize, just like, for me this year, my product pricing, but also my services got completely refined because I had a bunch of costs, like physical hard costs for just doing business. My insurance costs went up this year. My overhead went up this year. Inflation and like product pricing on things that I use to do my job have gone up this year. And so if all of those things have gone up, I'm automatically making less money at the same rate. So I had to increase my rates to just technically make the same amount of money.
Yes. And this is something this is why pricing never goes away. You need to revisit your pricing once a year for that exact reason, just for inflation. Yeah. You need to make sure as your costs go up, your rates need to go up to reflect that. Everyone does it. We just don't see it. Like when you go to the grocery store and there's a drought in California and you want to buy lettuce all of a sudden, for a head of iceberg goes up from $1.99 to $3.99.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you remember, what was it? Well, like cauliflower a couple years ago, and it was like you could not buy a head of it was like gold.
Yes. And it's still crazy. Like I'll go in one week and it's $5.99 and I'll go in another week it's $2.99 and it's just all over bananas. But the fact is you have a choice. You either buy the cauliflower or you don't, right? And that's how it goes. But the reason the grocery store is raising it is because they're paying more in fuel costs. They're paying more at the wholesale level. They're paying all these extra fees, and they need to pass that on.
Yes. Right? Just like quite literally every retail business, and we've experienced it at the bike shop, but we had massive costs due to COVID. Cleaning costs have skyrocketed. Like I can't even tell you. Cleaning costs, like cost of Lysol wipes and bleach and my goodness, cleaning supplies have skyrocketed. So of course our pricing went up because our overhead costs went up. It costs us more to do business. And so you can't expect, like, there's a reason, a phone call used to be a nickel, and now, like, I remember in high school carrying, well, that was when we had payphones, but I would always shove a quarter in my shoe. You go out at night and I'd have a quarter in my shoe. And I knew that if anything happened, I would have a quarter I could call home. What could you do with a quarter right now? I don't even know. But like...
Gumball machine? I don't know.
Gumball machine, maybe. I don't even know. And you get like the stalest gumball, break a teeth, and then you'd have to go to the dentist. And all your costs would go up again. But the prices on things go up. Yes. And so to me, when we discuss pricing strategies, it's like, that's life. Price goes up. My age goes up every year. Like, things go up.
Yes.
It happens.
So when I worked retail and we would get a new shipment of, aspirin in, I worked in the drug retail industry. My shipper receiver, she would unpack it, take the packing slip and the invoice, and she'd input it all into our point of sale system. And our point of sale system had pre-programmed margins in for each category and product, right? And so if the price had gone up per unit and she put the price in, the point of sale system would automatically calculate the new price based on the margin we needed to get to run our business. And this is something service-based businesses often don't think about, especially when you're starting out. What is your margin?
Yeah.
Do you know what your margin is? And your margin is, so gross profit, gross margin, they're a little bit different, but essentially, what is the amount you need to mark up what you do in order to pay your costs, pay yourself, and have some profit?
Yeah.
Do you know what that is? Because if you don't know what that is,
Yeah.
you're never going to price yourself properly.
That was my first big mistake. My first year as a freelancer was I got really excited. And in terms of like clear, hard numbers, I was really excited that I billed out. So I had invoiced out uh, just over $80,000,
Woohoo!
and that was huge, right? I mean, that's a big chunk of change.
And then what were your expenses?
And so, and this is the kicker, is that I was like, I made 80 grand. I did not make 80 grand.
No, you didn't make anywhere
There was
near 80
a
grand.
shit ton of HST that I needed to owe the government that I collected. Then I needed to pay all of my taxes. Next thing you know, how much money did Heather make? Probably $10,000. Like, I know that's a very low, but it felt like that. And so, and when people will say, oh gosh, somebody who sits in a job and makes $80,000 a year, when they look sometimes at a service person who's independent, when they look at the rates, they're like, what? That's what I make in. No, 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 no. You make so much more than 80 grand. You have benefits on top of that. Your tax comes off of it. All the things. You go to an office that the heat's paid for. You sit down in a chair that you didn't buy, work on a desk that you didn't buy, all of those things. But all of us independent people, like Melissa, when your computer dies, who's the HR person? Your dog Sam? Is Sam going out to buy you a new computer?
I know. I need a new computer.
Right? And you don't just send an email to the HR department and say, my computer sucks. Could I please have a new one?
Yeah. I wish I could.
Wish you could, exactly. But you'd be sending that email to yourself. And that is a cost. Like,
it's a cost of doing business.
It's a cost of doing business. And so you really need to think that through. Even bank account fees. Mm-hmm. Like, if you don't have, a basic banking account for your
business bank account fees are ridiculous.
Exactly. Business banking fees are ridiculous, especially if you don't have, oh, I'm sorry, small business, you don't have $20,000 just to sit there and float and avoid the fees every month? No, sir, big bank man, I don't. And so you're going to absorb all those fees, those banking fees. That's a cost of doing business.
That's
right. And so I think if you start to look at all of those things really critically, and that's where we need to put the ego aside, because especially as artists and creatives, we are saying that the value, it's in us. And in fact, that's only part of it. Like there's a lot of value in actual, like, tangible things, and that you really need to account for that and not be disheartened when somebody comes back and says that's too much money, because it's not a diss on you. I think that's to remember.
It's not. And that's why it is really important that you know your costs, and that as they go up, like, you don't have to change your rate every time a cost goes up, but you should sit down once a year and look at how all the costs have gone up and adjust so that you're still making that margin every year. That's just smart business. You should not be subsidizing your bank, right? Because they upped your fees.
Totally.
Or anything else that goes up, like, because that's what you're doing. You're subsidizing them.
You're subsidizing. That's exactly it. And if your costs go down, and we experienced this at the bike shop, but I also saw it just recently with some art supplies. I was able to get a bunch of things that I use all the time at like 75% off. And I took full advantage of that sale. Am I lowering my prices? No friggin' way. No. That just means that the one time I take a hit on something, this just gave me that cushion. Yeah. Exactly.
If that cost goes down permanently, then you might look at dropping your rate. But if it's a one-time, like you said, you got something that you needed to run your business at a clear out rate or something like that, the next time you buy it, it's going to be back at the regular price. You don't want to.
Exactly it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And like, if you change, even for instance, if you change supplies, like if you all of a sudden upgrade your markers or upgrade your printer, or like, those are hard costs that need to go.
Yeah, if you're upgrading, this is something I'm looking at right now. The paper that I use for my greeting cards has been discontinued. And so I'm looking at new papers, evaluating new papers. And this is the thing. If I want to use a luxury paper, Yes, there is luxury paper out there, but
Yeah. Oh,
something
yeah.
that's really thick and has a really beautiful feel to it and just feels like you're getting a beautiful card in the
Hmm.
mail, that's going to cost me more than if I buy, a cheap 80-pound paper
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
I use. It's still fine. It's still a card. It's still my design on it. But, um, you know, if I'm going to pay more for that, then that is going to be passed on to the customer because they're getting a better product.
For sure. And so not only is there and this I think goes to the branding conversation that we were having earlier, and the paper is a brilliant example, is that just as you said, your design, it's still a card, and the design would still be a Melissa Fine Line Designs on the front. Like the authenticity and the creativity involved in that design is still the same. But the paper quality, which increases the hard cost, is also a, a branding, because when I receive that card, that's great that the design's super cute. If it looks like I folded a piece of printer paper in half, I'm not going to buy. I don't care how cute the design is. This is not something I want to send somebody to tell them I love them, right?
Yeah.
And so it's that branding experience that when I get this beautiful card with this beautiful artwork, the feel of the paper, I'm like, oh yeah, this is worth every penny.
And that
Because and
goes back to, raising your rates,
yeah,
meaning that you have to ensure that the service or the product that you're providing reflects the rate that you're
exactly.
charging. So, yes. So, in terms of raising your rates, those are the things you need to think about. You need to make sure you're covering your costs appropriately.
Yeah,
And if you're not, you need to raise your rates right now. Like, if you're making a 5% profit, you are not charging enough. Like, you're just not.
you're just not. No,
You're
for sure
just
not.
not. Like, you should be aiming for, I would say, a minimum of 35%, if not
Yeah,
higher than that.
yeah.
So, yes, you need to raise your rates to cover your costs. If you want to raise your rates, you need to make sure that the services you're offering reflect the rate or the impression that you want to give potential customers.
Mm-hmm.
How do we tell existing customers we're raising our rates? This is the struggle, right? Because it's you can raise your rates, and anybody who comes on board after that point pays the new rate, right?
Yeah.
They don't know what you were charging before unless they've maybe been passed on by another client of yours who's told
Mm-hmm.
them what they paid.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you go back and say to your client of 5 years that you're
Mm-hmm.
raising your rate, especially if it's a big increase?
That's a really good question. And I've been thinking about it since we started talking about this episode. And because you and I have both been going through the exercise of
Mm-hmm.
raising our rates and whatnot. And I have a longstanding client who I have been working with my entire freelance career. So we're, almost 7 years now. And over that time, I have raised my rates a number of times. I have never categorically told them my rates are going up. I've never had a conversation saying, you'll note that this is higher than the last rate that I gave you. And the reason being is that I do a lot of projects. And so
Yes.
it's a very different than I'm giving you and not that creating a website isn't a quote project, but there's some sort of deliverable on the end of it. Whereas I'm like sort of a little bit wishy-washy in that I'm delivering a brand strategy, like it could be a 42 slide power presentation, or it could be one, like it's not a website. So I'm not handing over like a widget. I'm handing over a project. And so whenever I do my project quotes, I just raise them and we either move forward with the project or we don't. So I think sometimes you don't even need to have that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the client continuously comes back to you and says, hey, we want to work with you on a project, what's your quote on it? And you come back with a quote, unless it's like 5 times what it was the last time you sent them, or something that's shockingly, but a 10% increase, a 20% increase, they're probably not going to even notice. And I'm not saying you're pulling the wool over anybody's eyes, but rates change. All of those people who I work with at that client, their salaries have gone up in 7 years. They've been given cost of living increases. They've been given raises and bonuses for excellent performance. So why can't I give myself the same when I submit a project to them? And do I need to tell them my rates have gone up? Good news, I gave myself a raise. Like, no,
I
right?
think, yeah, no, I think that's very true when you're doing it from a project based
Yeah. It's different than if
place.
it's like you're greeting like a price on a product. I think that's
Yes.
different.
So for a project based, because obviously they're saying yes to it because they still see the value. Like
Yeah,
the rate matches the value they feel they're getting. And that's essentially
exactly.
what pricing is. You are making somebody feel like they are getting good value for the money they are giving you. Like
You.
both sides are equally benefiting.
Yeah.
So where I struggle is like I find project based pricing so much easier to do because like you
Hmm.
said, there's there's more opportunity there to show the value of what you're giving, first of all,
Yes.
I think, and also to just be flexible in how you price.
Hmm.
And to me, what is your budget is one of the very first questions I ask
First, I was
any
just
new
about to
client.
say,
Yes,
yes.
absolutely. As a graphic designer, as a blogger, and anything that I do. And it's not because I'm going to say, if you come back and say my budget is 10 grand, I'm not going to say, oh, it's 10 grand then. That's not how
No.
it works. I mean, one of the reasons why you want to ask your clients what their budget is first of all, you want to make sure they're in the ballpark,
Yeah.
right? If
Because what if
you're
they said, I have $5, Melissa, we need a
yeah,
new website. You're like, okay, well, let's just get this conversation short right now. No.
exactly. So you want to immediately be able to say, you don't want to waste anybody's time. If they come
Yeah.
back and they're just not even in the ballpark, that way you can immediately say to them, I am not the best fit for you. This is the minimum investment to work with me. That's
Mhm.
another great way to raise your rates. Have a minimum investment to
Yes.
work with you so
Yeah.
that people, you don't need to put your rates out there, but if you put your minimum investment number on your website or in your communication, it tells people where they need to be
Hmm.
in order to work with you. It doesn't mean that's what you charge. You could be charging double that, triple that, depending
Hmm.
on the project, right? But by asking what their budget is, immediately you know if we're in the same ballpark. Okay, you come
Totally.
back and you say your budget is $5,000. Okay, I can work with you for $5,000. Now let's find out what you want.
Exactly.
And this is where you can, if they come back and they say their budget is $5,000, but their list of things they want is $10,000 worth of work,
Hmm.
then by knowing their budget, you have the opportunity to negotiate.
Yeah.
And I do this all the time with clients and I've never had a problem with it, but it's a way that I can ensure I'm being paid fairly
For
is
sure.
by saying, you know what, I can do this and this and this for you. Or I can suggest other options that may not be as costly and may not
Hmm.
get them exactly what they want, but gets them close.
Hmm.
So this is where project-based pricing can really help you ensure that you're getting paid what you want to get paid
Totally. And
without
God, I love the question. Like, to me, that's always the first question. Like, what's your budget? What are we working with here? Because that is such an opportunity. Like, to know that, to be able to have that information to help build your plan. And I'll tell you, and I know this obviously fits with what I do versus maybe some other creatives, but as sort of my PR strategy side, whenever somebody comes to me and they have a project they want to do, and then I say, what's your budget? And they say, well, the whole project budget is this. I love to get the big macro, like bird's eye view of the whole thing you're working on, because I will happily, for free, spend an hour on the phone with you talking about the entire project and mapping it out and saying, gosh, strategically, if I were you, I would maybe realign some budget from this to that, and then you could do this and that. And that 1 hour that if I were billing them, I would be charging $200 for. I I would say most of the time, if I take the time to spend that hour, I get more money out of the project because we've actually talked through the project and you are coming like from a branding perspective, the value that I have added is immeasurable. And that I think like that conversation is a very important conversation to have for
yes,
sure.
absolutely. And I do just want to point out that if somebody thinks that you are ripping or you are about to rip them off because you asked that question, then they may not be the right customer to work with
Totally.
because they are going to be a customer who's going to be very focused on that bottom line and not as focused on getting the right solution for themselves.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
and that can just lead to all kinds of conflict down the road that
Hmm.
has nothing to do with money. And
Hmm.
it gets you into that situation where you could wind up being very resentful because you are being
Yes.
pressured to produce work that you're not being fairly compensated for. So that's something to think about. I'm a big proponent of project-based pricing. I think it is the easiest way to
Hmm.
raise your rates. However, there are other situations, both service and product situations, where that doesn't work as easily. And Heather and I are going to talk about that next week. So today we're just talking about how to raise your service-based rates, but next week we're going to be talking about how to raise your rates in terms of product
Products.
and services that are kind of productized, if that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
we'll
like
be
a commissioned piece. To me, that's a product, but it's also a service.
Yes. So there's instances like that. Instances like, for my particular, as a graphic designer, I have things that are very project based, and I have other services I offer that are very producty.
Yeah. Yes.
So we'll get into how to raise those rates next week. So,
And I'll just say, I think before we end this, I think one of the really important things for both product, but particularly for services and rates, I think it's really important for all of us to remember that you are in charge of this,
mhm.
and you also have the opportunity. You don't need a lawyer. You can create a Word document that is a scope of work or a contract that very clearly lays out the fee for service, the deliverables, your timelines, when you want to get paid, what the payment schedule is. And that is something that I encourage every small business owner to have for every single project, no matter how small,
Yeah.
because this is part of being a business. And also, when you send that off to somebody, even for a small project, that you're a professional. Here's the scope of work. Here's my fee schedule. Here's exactly what I promised I would deliver you.
Mhm.
All of that is really, really important. And in fact, I have a flip side to my scope of work document is that I have very clearly, here's what I'm going to deliver to you, but here's also what you're going to deliver to
Yes.
me as the client.
That's very important, and I have that in all my contracts
Hmm.
as well, is that, and make it very clear, if they don't
Yep.
hit certain deadlines or they don't get you the things that you need on time, make it very clear how that impacts the deadline of the project, so that they know if you're a day late delivering something, I will be a day late
Yep.
delivering on my end. So that's super clear. The other thing that I like to do in those type of contracts, and this is usually in the scope of work area, is
Hmm.
I want to make it clear the value
Yes.
that is coming through in this. This is really important. It's anybody can draw, it's like anybody can make a logo. Let's be honest. You don't need to go to design school to make a logo. People make logos for themselves all the time.
Hmm.
But when you hire me to make your logo, we are
Hmm.
going to go through a branding process,
Yes.
which is very different than me just plunking myself down in front of Illustrator and making you something out of 3 triangles or
Yeah.
whatever, right?
Yes.
So it's and make it clear in that what that value proposition is, because that's a huge part of your pricing, is the value that you bring to this that somebody else can't bring, and
Yes.
that's where you can justify those higher rates.
For sure. And I even have it in my mural contract. It says, as part of this fee, I have $2 million liability insurance. I have. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
very clearly showing, and it's some of those hard costs that I incur, but it also shows that I'm a professional.
Yeah.
Because if they get a quote from somebody else that doesn't say that they have $2 million worth of liability insurance, do you want them standing on scaffolding in your property? I'm thinking
Exactly.
no. Um, maybe it's the lawyer's daughter and me talking, but I'm thinking no. And so you really, those are important things to have in there. And the way you set things up is the way it ends up. And so you can stem some of the frustration. You can stem some of the stretching of budget and boundaries and things like that if you set it up very clearly in a contract. So I would say, even if you decide not to raise your rates, but I think everybody across the board categorically, just raise your rates. Like, just do it, because I'm sure you are deserving of it.
Yeah, everybody go out and do a 5% rate increase after listening to this episode. It's not much.
And create a contract for yourself.
Yes.
You have homework. You've been warned.
That's great. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening this week. Heather and I will be back next week to talk about raising your rates on products and as I said, productized services. That's a hard thing to say, and I'm not even sure if it's a real thing, but that's what
we will make it so.
That's what we'll be talking about next week. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening, and we will talk to you all next week. Thank you so much for joining us for the And She Looked Up Creative Hour. If you're looking for links or resources mentioned in this episode, you can find detailed show notes on our website at andshелookedup.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter for more business tips, profiles of inspiring Canadian creative women, and so much more. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the show via your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. We always love to hear from you, so we'd love it if you'd leave us a review through iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Drop us a note via our website at andshелookedup.com or come say hi on Instagram at andshелookedup. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.